From your local election headquarters, this is the battle for the 22nd District.
And good evening. Welcome to all of you just joining us online, and thanks for staying with us from all those folks who are with us on TV who are now joining us on the web. This is the battle for the 22nd District. This is our panel discussion. We have News Channel 9's Andrew Donovan, WUTR Utica reporter Thomas Fleming, and WIVT Binghamton News Director Jim Emke, who are all joining me right now. Let's start off, Jim, by talking about the future of the 22nd Congressional District, because whatever way this comes out, whether Congressman Brindisi holds on to his seat or Claudia Tenney reclaims her seat, I mean, there is a lot up in the air for the 22nd District going forward, isn't there?
Yeah, one of the many things that makes this district so different from most of the districts in the House of Representatives is that it is fairly well balanced in terms of party registration. Steve Scalise, the House Minority Whip, made a campaign appearance throughout the district on behalf of Claudia Tenney, and when we spoke with him, he acknowledged that in the entire House of Representatives there are only maybe 30 total districts nationwide in which the party registrations are balanced enough to make them competitive. And I think we can all assume that once the census numbers come in from the 2020 census, it will once again show that New York is not keeping pace population-wise with other states, and it's a foregone conclusion that the state will lose one congressional seat, possibly two, and upstate New York has been losing population at a much faster clip than downstate. So upstate New York's going to lose at least one district, possibly two, and at this point now the Democrats are fully in charge in Albany. They may give lip service to independent redistricting, but the reality is they've said that before, and in the past, typically when the Republicans controlled the state Senate, they could do some horse trading. They would make certain districts safe for one party in exchange for a safe district for another. Well, there's no reason now for the Democrats to have to horse trade with anyone. They'll design the districts in whatever way is best for them. They'll probably lump as many Republicans into one or two upstate districts, make them easy Republican districts, and then try to make things safe for Democrats everywhere else. So if I had to guess, I would tend to think that if Tenney prevails here, she'll suddenly find herself in the same district as her neighboring Republican John Katko once they redraw the lines. On the other hand, if Brindisi wins, I wouldn't be surprised if they go and try to find some Democratic areas to add to his district to make his safe. For example, we're very close to Ithaca, and there are plenty of Democrats there. I could easily see them adding Ithaca to Brindisi's district if he prevails.
Thomas Fleming, I want to bring you in now. This 22nd District was actually created back after the last census, back in 2011. It kind of reshaped a lot there. What do you think this upcoming, well, the current census, once we get all those numbers in, will do to the 22nd to pick up on what Jim has been saying about what this district looks like and just kind of the makeup there? You're in Utica.
Well, I think he brings up a very good point. People are certainly leaving, and in fact, one of the Republicans' biggest points, particularly when they get into the conversation about rising taxes, is that will further exacerbate a problem that already exists, and that's what they call a mass exodus of people out of New York State. So I do think that it has a significant area or a significant impact potentially. But one thing that I did want to talk about is how this particular election shapes the narrative going forward on what changes need to be made to New York State elections. Because out of all of the counties and their own county boards of elections, New York has kind of had a free-for-all in terms of what counties are able to do, holding on to their votes, especially with early voting. So the question is, what can actually get changed in the future, and which voting rights advocates come out? What are their biggest pieces of platform that they want to be addressed? And that's going to be something that I'm personally going to be keeping an eye on.
This race certainly, Thomas, has exposed a lot of problems with the state's kind of patchwork, really, system of county votes. Bring in News Channel 9's Andrew Donovan, my colleague here in Syracuse. So you work in Syracuse, obviously now, Andrew, and you have for a few years. But you're from the Utica area. So you were in court today, kind of watching this all unfold, and you've been following the court cases. What was it that they were really that you drew from Judge Del Conte today?
I'm on mute. Classic 2020 problem. It's been 8 years in Syracuse almost, so I can't believe it. But yeah, worked 7 years in Utica, and I'm from there, obviously. You know, court, it's just been a fascinating ride because we never quite know what the judge is going to do. It's been hard to predict. We actually left today's court hearing thinking there could be a decision tonight. So I've been refreshing the court documents all night. I talked to other reporters from other outlets. They agreed. They interpreted it the same way as me. I talked to someone else on the call who's involved in the process. They interpreted a decision, but I've kept refreshing, and there's nothing right now. And it sounds like different people are interpreting what he said as to when his ruling will come. Some might expect it tomorrow, and I don't think they can go much longer than sometime midweek. But I do think what Thomas mentioned about the issues that this courtroom has discovered across the district in these boards of elections offices. I talked to the Onondaga County Democratic Commissioner today. For him, it's a spectator sport because he's basically watching from Onondaga County the mess that's happening in these other counties, and he will be part of the reform. He helps lobby and helps craft legislation, and in our conversation today, he made it clear that the state needs to do something to make consistent the process among the boards of elections. You truly have 8 different operations happening, and that's one of the reasons this has been such a mess, is because 8 boards of elections and 8 counties are doing 8 different things. And it's just hard to keep track of, and it's hard to diagnose a problem when one occurs.
Jim, this has been a slugfest, not just since Election Day, not just in this campaign, but probably for at least a couple of years now. Any surprise to you that this is where we are? Remember, as you do very well, 2018, this was a very, not 12 votes narrow, but it was also a very narrow race as well. So I guess no real surprise that this is where we are today?
Yeah, well, hearkening back to Thomas's piece during the half-hour special, there are so many similarities between these candidates. Not only do they live close by each other, but they also sat in the assembly together, and perhaps familiarity breeds contempt, because there definitely doesn't appear to be any love lost between the two of them. Both very feisty, using a lot of strong language in their fundraising appeals, the emails going out to each of their supporters, filled with language that implies that somehow the other side is trying to cheat them out of their proper victory. And so I can expect that whoever ultimately does not win in this situation is going to be something perhaps slightly less than a gracious loser.
I always used to like to use sports analogies, Jim. So in this case, I think these teams just don't get along. So Andrew Donovan, I want to ask you, depending on which way this comes out, what do you think that Anthony Brindisi and Claudia Tenney do in 2 years from now?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. I think it depends how it turns out. I think if Tenney somehow loses by a slim margin, you might see some shades of the Trump legal strategy come out, that the election was somehow rigged. They've already released a campaign statement when Brindisi was ahead just for a few days before Thanksgiving, saying that there's illegal votes or dead people voted. You almost wonder if she's going to follow the Trump strategy and perhaps continually keep this conversation alive to easily set up another race in 2 years. I don't know that. I have no insight into that. I don't even think they've gotten that far because they're still worried about if they're showing up to Washington.
It's all a crystal ball. It's all a crystal ball I'm showing you. But Anthony Brindisi, what do you think he would end up doing? And then I'm going to go to Thomas right after that. But what do you think if he ends up losing? Do you think he tries to reclaim that?
That's a great question. He's more down in the middle of the road. It's hard for him to point to a national leader he would take a play out of, where Tenney could very much point to what President Trump does. And think about it. President Trump, if he does declare a bid for re-election in 4 years, Tenney doing it for 2 years is much more doable. 2 years is not that long. 4 is a little longer. With Anthony Brindisi, though, I'm not sure. I really couldn't tell you. I know just from the history of that race, he decided not to run, actually, the year Tenney first won. He decided not to be the Democrat when Richard Hanna announced he was retiring, and it's because of his family. He didn't want to make these trips to Washington. He didn't want to do the 2-year race, the fundraising in between. So you wonder, I see posts from him on social media of him and his family as recently as, I think, getting a Christmas tree. Maybe he'll just, go back to being an attorney in Utica. His family name is on a law firm, and maybe just enjoy time with his kids. I'm not sure.
Thomas Fleming, let me ask you this. Let me pose it this way. Is it more or less attractive to these two, given what we have talked about tonight, what Jim has talked about, with the potential for redistricting? Because it is very clear the Democrats have the control. They have the say. This is the way politics has gone for a long time. You redistrict in a way that's favorable to your party. So that said, depending on this outcome, either way, is it more or less likely that either one of these would run again in 2 years if they're not successful now?
I think for Anthony Brindisi, absolutely. You think about the Democrats who have a supermajority, they will most likely redistrict in a way that will give this particular district an advantage, or hopefully where, from their perspective, they avoid a race this close again. So if they were to bring in an Ithaca from Tompkins County, and you were to be able to have a stronghold in Ithaca and in Binghamton and Broome County, a traditionally quite Democratic majority in terms of voters, that would be a huge win for Democrats, which would give any Democrat who would want to run for this congressional seat a big advantage, or at least an incentive in terms of potentially getting that advantage in votes.
Broome County, Jim Emke, bring you back in. Broome County certainly a strong place for Anthony Brindisi. Really, this time around, the only place that he really won convincingly, or won at all. You've covered a lot of races, Jim. You're still a young guy, I know, like all of us here. But have you ever seen anything like this in all my years covering politics, and they are many, despite my youth? I've never seen anything close to this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in smaller elections, sure. I mean, I do recall a race for Broome County Legislature in, I think, either the late 90s or early 2000s, when our current Assemblywoman, Donna Lupardo, it ended up in a tie. She was a legislator running against a gentleman who she had taken the seat after he had decided to run for sheriff. He lost that race. He came back 2 years later, decided he wanted his seat back on the legislature. They ended up tied, and in that instance, there was no coin flip. They actually had a special election a couple months later, and then she lost. So, but on this scale, a congressional race with this much turnout, with this much money spent. But I would say in terms of the future, two things that I'm really stuck on. One, will the 22nd congressional district even exist? So, I mean, since one or two have to go, this might be ripe for carving up. So they could, take Utica, put it in with Syracuse, take Binghamton, lump it into Tom Reed's district to the west, perhaps. So that's a possibility. The other issue is, obviously, I don't think Tenney would have run again if she didn't have major financial commitments from big-time Republican donors out of Washington, D.C. So all of this money that was spent in this district did not come solely from this district.
Pick up on that, Jim. So do you think, I don't mean to cut you off, but to pick up on that, does that make her a less appealing candidate for the Republican Party? Because let's face it, to some degree in the House, you're trying to stack numbers. As Rick Klein, the ABC political director, told me, about counting noses, right? You have the votes to line up there. It's not always about that individual person in that particular district. So they recut up that district. She's now a two-time loser of that seat. Does that make her just less attractive, where that money doesn't come funneling in from national PACs and other places in the country, and so she really has no choice but to not really run? Yeah,
I would say especially her, in terms of having lost twice in a row, if she does not prevail, I would question how much they would be willing to financially back her. But also just even with him, if he wins re-election as an incumbent, I think they would be even less likely to put money into any Republican. But really, it's all sort of a moot point until you know what the district is and whether or not the district even still exists.
Thomas, what's the feeling you get from around the Utica area? Again, this is 8 counties, so it covers a big swath of New York State. But from where you are in Utica, what's kind of the feeling you're getting there as to which way people are leaning? I mean, are they split down the middle with this? How intently are they following this race?
Well, you know, it's quite close here. If you looked at the numbers, this recent Siena College poll that came out before the election had Brindisi earning about 43% of the voters on who they plan to vote for, and Tenney earned about 44%. I will say that it made a significant difference that this was in an election year in the presidential election, and it's something that we have talked here, particularly on election night, with our own panelists, is this idea of coattail voting, and Tenney was able to attach her name to Trump's name, and in fact you have plenty of signs that you'll see attaching Tenney and Trump's name together. It's been a good amount of her campaigns having Tenney-Trump campaign events, and so her supporters have been revitalized, and they've been coming out and making their voices heard. Particularly, in fact, we were able to see it during voting. They would line up. Obviously, they can't be too close to the door for where the election is, but they would line up and they would have their own events. And so her voters have been very passionate about supporting her, particularly considering that it was a presidential election year, and I think that made a big impact. Obviously, Brindisi has his supporters, but you don't see them out like you see Tenney's voters with the signs and with the USA hats and things like that. Her supporters have been incredibly vocal here in this area.
Let's kind of bring this home. I'm going to go around to each of you, so start putting on your thinking caps. Last thought, what do we walk away from tonight? What are we, Andrew Donovan, what are we expecting from Judge Del Conte? Will it be very clear where we go next, or will this ruling that we're waiting for, this written ruling, just give us a next step, or kind of sum up where you are tonight with the battle for the 22nd for me?
Well, I just refreshed the court document, still nothing. Part of me wants to see it before we all go to bed tonight, but I think it might be something we have to look for in the morning or later on tomorrow. Let me recap quick the arguments that each campaign is making. The Tenney campaign wants the judge to certify the results the way they are, with her leading by 12 votes. She says that's what's been, legally cast and legally canvassed by the Board of Elections. The Brindisi campaign wants the judge to order that the ballots with errors get fixed at the different boards of elections, and then only those ballots would be recounted or recanvassed. Neither campaign is asking for a recount. But where I think this could be headed is the judge ordering a full recount of every ballot across the 8 counties.
Wow.
He said something in court today. He was asking one of the attorneys, he said, do you want this done fast or do you want this done right? And of course everyone says, well, we want it done right, which would be probably a full recount. Problem with that is how long it might take. And again, the Congress convenes on January 3rd, and the court basically takes a recess the week of Christmas into New Year's. So this really needs to be wrapped up in court before Christmas. I don't know, maybe the 23rd before Christmas Eve. I'm not sure if they'll work Christmas Eve, probably not. But so that gives them very few time not a lot of time to do this. I will add that we saw in Onondaga County with the COVID positive case, other boards of elections came to count the ballots, finish the counting once the board reopened. So maybe you would see other boards of elections helping the 8 county boards of elections to expedite that process. So maybe it's not as long as it could be if other boards of elections were still busy, but maybe they can step up and help out.
Andrew, thank you. Thomas Fleming, your final thoughts on where we are with the 22nd and where you think this goes now?
A couple of things. First of all, to Andrew's point, I think it's important to harken back to what the judge said recently, and he said, quote, "The one thing I'm supposed to do is to make sure that others follow the law." So we have to ask ourselves, is it his job to make sure that there is someone in Washington by January, or is it to be able to do this correctly? And I also think you have to remember this precedent has been set in terms of a full recount. Starting January 1st, all elections in New York State could be subject to a full recount if it's less than 0.5% for a margin or less than 20 votes. Obviously, that was passed earlier, but it doesn't go into effect until January. So this election was kind of a subject to bad timing, and the decision could have already been made. But another point in terms of full recount, which is certainly possible here in Oneida County, one Oneida County Board of Election worker did test positive for COVID, potentially exposing other workers. So that could slow down that process by a number of weeks. But in terms of looking forward, my final thought is one thing that I think will definitely be addressed, whether it be in the state legislature, it will definitely be brought up by voting advocates, is getting rid of this 10-day absentee ballot hold in terms of counting the votes. New York State is one of 3 states in the entire country that still wait a number of days after Election Day to start counting those votes. And you saw it this year, a number of counties started on different days. They didn't all start on the same day, so even there was some variables there. But the reason why they do that is to give voters a chance to re-vote if they change their mind. If they make an early vote, they can come in and vote and change their mind, and that one will be counted. But the question is that luxury worth all of the trouble that the state is going to waiting this long, which slows down the process and also gives lawyers the chance of bringing in challenges, many of which are very inconsequential, which also further down that, slow down that process. So it'll be interesting to watch how this is addressed in state legislature.
Jim Emke, your final thoughts on the battle for the 22nd?
Well, I would just say that this has been a wild ride that we're not likely to see once again. And when you just think back to, it was 2014 when Richard Hanna, considered a moderate Republican, didn't even have a Democratic challenger. And that was the year Claudia Tenney went ahead and tried to primary him from his right. She did engage in the primary. He held her off, and then basically clear sailing, no opponent in the general election. Now, fast forward this, 6 years, and one of the most expensive races in all of the country, one of the tightest. If this is the last hurrah for the 22nd Congressional District in New York, it's certainly been a wild one.
It's going out in 2020 style, I guess. Gentlemen, thank you so much for spending some time with us here digitally online. I can't thank you enough. Thomas Fleming from WUTR in Utica, Jim Emke from WIVT in Binghamton, and News Channel 9's Andrew Donovan from, of course, WSYR-TV here, my colleague in Syracuse. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight as we break down and we await Judge Del Conte's decision in the battle for the 22nd.